I'm the Senior Biotechnology Analyst and Managing Director at Boral Capital. My focus really has been on biotechnology and following biologics. And I've actually been a huge, very passionate fan of cell therapy and the cell therapy space. I've been waiting 25 years to see cell therapy come to fruition. And we are seeing signs that's happening. And I do want to differentiate when I say cell therapy. I'm not talking about oncology. I'm not talking about CAR T. I'm really talking about the use of cells. And in this case, in the case of Enlivex, a particular type of cell, a fibroblast, and what its function might be in not curing a heart attack, not curing a stroke, but actually a very much a medically speaking unmet medical need, and that is joint pain, osteoarthritis. And what Enlivex has done, and I think it's pretty smart, is they've narrowed the focus to osteoarthritis of the knee. Recent clinical trial results were very compelling, particularly in a pre-specified age group, folks over the age of 60, where the data showed a 72% reduction in pain and a over 100% improvement in function versus placebo. So it is an exciting time to think that we are about to see the next wave. And what I mean by that is in biotechnology in particular, we often see an initial wave of excitement, and we see kind of reality setting in, and then we see a second wave and a third wave. And this is pretty typical. And I think we're about to see the third wave of cell-based therapy and its ability to be disease modifying, which I think is a very much a differentiating factor. And this is coming at a time where the world is aging, right? We know that we have an aggressively older population. We also know that one of the secrets to aging gracefully is muscle mass. Muscle mass can do lots of things. First of all, your daily quality of life. But it's also believed that muscle mass plays a role in your mental health. So more and more people over the age of 50 are going to be exercising and trying to build muscle. Well, anyone who's been in the gym and has tried to build muscle knows what comes with that, and that's joint pain. And so to the extent that you start hitting joint pain, people are going to seek ways to intervene. And so with that kind of backdrop, I got very interested in Enlivex. I think it's a very exciting company based in Israel. Ticker symbol is ENLV. We have a buy rating. I'm going to tell you that my price target is 13. The stock is deeply, deeply oversold. And if you read some of my notes, they're available on our website at Boral Capital. You'll see that I think it's oversold for all the wrong reasons, and it has to do with capital. In the micro cap world, raising capital is critical, and I think this company in particular is paying a high price for capital they raised a long time ago that was dilutive to the company, and I think that they're beyond that. So I think the stage is really set now for the stock to rebound. So with that said, we have a really interesting panel. First of all, I'm so excited to have Dr. Roger Pomerantz on the panel. Many of you will recognize his name as one of the people associated with Merck, R&D and licensing, and Dr. Pomerantz is going to introduce himself and walk through kind of why is he involved in Enlivex? He's on the board. He's actually the vice chairman. And we have two key opinion leaders. Dr. Conaghan, thank you for joining us. Great to meet you. And Dr. Mobasheri, thank you for joining us too. Each of these KOLs will talk a little bit about what their interest is, how they're involved in Enlivex, how they see the therapy to be differentiated. So with that said, why don't we start with Dr. Mobasheri, who's a professor of musculoskeletal biology at the University and forgive me if I mispronounce this, Oulu in Finland, which is wonderful. And tell me a little bit about what's your practice, kind of why are you interested in Enlivex? What's your interest in osteoarthritis, generally speaking?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Jason, for the kind introduction. My background is basic science. So I'm actually one of these researchers who's developing the next generation cell and gene therapies. We have several programs in our lab. We're actually developing adeno-associated viral gene therapy for low back pain and disc degeneration. I also have an interest in osteoarthritis, particularly biomarkers and the reason why I got so excited about Enlivex and their product is, first of all, it's repositioned from sepsis. So they already have quite a strong, solid science base in the work that they've done in sepsis. And then they have embraced the idea of immunomodulation in what they do and recognizing for more than 20 years of research in mesenchymal stem cells, or as Arnold Kaplan described them, medicinal signaling cells. These cells actually don't home in and regenerate any of the joint tissues and cartilage. So clearly they're playing an immunomodulatory role. And we have a number of cell therapies being developed. And what I found really interesting about Enlivex is that they are disruptive, potentially from a price perspective and also from a scientific concept perspective. The idea to be able to modulate the activity of macrophages and perhaps even lining synovial cells is really interesting.
So, what is it about them when you say disruptive? I think often of a mesenchymal cell that exerts a trophic effect with its cytokine messengers, FOX, P3, the usual suspects. Here we're talking about a fibroblast. That itself seems like a unique angle. Tell me, what is the relationship between a fibroblast and osteoarthritis, and how can that better modulate a macrophage?
Well, it would actually seem counterintuitive to many of our colleagues working in the osteoarthritis field that we should be injecting fibroblasts into the joint. But really, it's a population of cells that are exhibiting a signal engineered in them to say to the macrophages, "Eat me." So they are basically apoptotic cells, and they're actually immunomodulating through that phosphatidylserine signaling molecule that says, "Come on, I'm ready. I'm waiting for you to come and eat me." So that's what's different about them, and that's their mechanism of engagement with the inflammatory cells in the joint. And no other cell therapy has taken that approach in osteoarthritis.
So, very interesting, and I wasn't completely aware of that. That what the fibroblasts are doing is they're kind of reinitiating the repair process by allowing the macrophages to kind of clear out the source of the inflammation. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Uh, Dr. Conaghan, thank you very much. NIHR Leeds Biomedical Research Center. I know your work in osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis. Um, I don't know when you authored 700 publications. Yeah, very impressive. Thank you. Tell me a little bit about how you came to be involved with Enlivex and kind of what your role has been with the company, and help me expand on what Dr. Mobasheri kind of talked about in terms of the using these cells for osteoarthritis of the knee.
Thanks, Jason. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay. So firstly, I'm a rheumatologist, and so I spend a lot of time talking to people about their joint pain. Jason, you'll be pleased to know I'm obsessed with muscle strength because muscle strength makes the world go round. It really does, and it reduces joint pain. And none of my patients can undo a jar or get out of a chair easily. And I've done a number of TV and radio things here trying to get people stronger. Back to osteoarthritis, I've spent over 30 years in osteoarthritis clinical research. A lot of that related to clinical trials, because I am desperate before I shuffle off the mortal coil to try and get one or two new therapies through to humans. We've had no new therapies in this field for 75 years, I think are really effective therapies. And I'm referring to steroid injections as the last big thing that is well recommended across all the guidelines for different bodies. And even they have problems. So we've had NSAIDs for over 100 years. We've had steroids for 75, and every other therapy is of dubious value or has problems. So one thing I have no problem talking about for hours and putting everybody to sleep is unmet need. There's heaps of unmet need. And 50% of people conservatively can't take, can't tolerate, or should not be on an anti-inflammatory drug. So that's a huge amount of people with unmet need out there, however you look at it. So we've not been very successful in developing osteoarthritis therapies. So we've had to start to look outwards, start to think of new ideas, new ways. Where does the pain come from is a big one. And trying to understand new ways of approaching that. One thing I believe, not all my colleagues universally believe, but a lot of the pain does seem to arise in the periphery. And we believe that, well, I believe that because of a number of strands of evidence. Anti-inflammatory drugs work predominantly in the periphery and have a good benefit. Steroids are injected into the joint, work well, and likely have a peripheral effect. Joint replacement happens in the periphery and has a good benefit for most people. And perhaps more importantly, a big class of drugs that failed to get to market, monoclonal antibodies to nerve growth factor, were very large molecules that don't cross the blood-brain barrier, and they work peripherally, and they were very effective analgesics. They died because of their side effects, but they worked effectively as analgesics. So all that, there's a big bunch of evidence suggesting that the majority of pain in most people is peripherally nociceptive. So something targeting locally is an important concept to do. So having said that, answer your question, Jason, what about Enlivex? How did I come there? I do work with a lot of companies trying to understand what therapies might work and designing things, trials appropriately. And that's how I came to meet Enlivex, was through working in this field and trying to understand new approaches to targeting immunomodulation, if you like, of what's going on inside the joint. So that's the start of the story, but I'm sure there'll be lots. You can keep going, Jason.
Sure. What did you think of the data? So when Enlivex reported the data and I saw 72% pain reduction and 109% improvement in function, and of course this was in the patients over 60 group, I'm wondering, as an analyst, right, I have to be very skeptical. Of course, our phase 1, phase 2 data sets always look great, right? And the data never looks as good when we get to phase 3. I also worry when I think about functional improvement, particularly in the knee, is how is that measured? So give me your impressions of the data. And I guess from an analytical point of view, I looked at it and I said, well, this is about as good as you could possibly get, right? But that you now have to replicate it in the next cycle. But, I'm not an expert. I don't see the real world of dealing with these patients. So if you could share your impressions.
So the first thing is that we're having some sort of modified optimism here, because the overall results were not positive, but the subset result, which seems consistent with an age-related phenotype, that is over 60 show a benefit, over 65 is even more of a benefit. So what we do see is a clear signal in that subgroup analysis, and the pain results there in the subgroup say, let's take the over 60s. And I'd rather use that as a cut point because there's more numbers, and numbers is a key thing here. But
By the way, pre-specified analysis, right, versus a post hoc analysis, which is from an analytical point of view, very, very different.
Yeah. And what we see in that pre-specified analysis is effect sizes in terms of pain and function that are in the range of what's called clinically meaningful. How do we know that? We know that from previous studies. So there are various ways of understanding clinical meaningfulness. One is the amount of difference between placebo and active therapy on a pain scale or on a function scale. And the amount of change you see in that subset is easily achieves those clinically meaningful benefits. The fact that it's there for pain and function is not so surprising. Both are using patient-reported outcome measures. There are no well-accepted objective measures of function. Of course, there's no objective measures of pain. But most therapies that are affected, NSAIDs, steroids, tend to improve both pain and function. So you would expect to see some benefit in both. There's probably only a couple of therapies that might help pain a bit but don't help function. Some of the opioid studies suggest there might be a small benefit on pain without much effect on function. And a recent methotrexate trial, a common drug we used for anti-inflammatory in hand OA, showed an effect on pain but not an effect on function. So generally speaking, I would expect to see some functional improvement, and here we see it, and we see quite a substantial effect. So in the subgroup, very good, important benefits for pain and function. Jason, jump back to me with anything else.
So why anything you can think of that explains why over 60 and 65 got even better versus the overall data population, where the younger patients, maybe their OA was less severe and therefore the potency of the effect was not as great because you were dealing with a smaller defect. I'm just wondering, I'm sure you scratched your head and said, why?
Well, it would have been much harder for me to understand had the results been the other way around. Had they only worked in younger people, I could have had no explanation for you at all. But before Ali jumps in, I see his hand. I think of this in two ways. Firstly, as somebody who's done a lot of imaging research, I know that people with radiographic KL2, Kellgren-Lawrence grade 2, often have no cartilage loss. Now, these are the people we put in clinical trials, but we know, for example, there are published trials. There's a recent published trial a couple of years ago from Galapagos who were doing a disease-modifying trial. And when they wanted to see structural progression, they put in certain X-ray criteria, one of which was KL2-3. And then they measured a joint space with an accurate way of measuring between joint distance, which is a more accurate way of measuring cartilage loss. And when they used those two criteria, 85% of the people in the study were KL3. So what we know is KLT2s, not only do they have less severe OA, many may not have OA. That's the nature of osteoarthritis clinical trials. So I think one thing we've done is, by taking an older age, take people who are more likely to have true osteoarthritis. The second issue, and here Ali might understand the pathophysiology better, but what we do know is there's something called immunoaging and immunosenescence, and how the body response changes as we get older. And there's a number of diseases in my area. Osteoarthritis is one that becomes more prevalent as you get older. There's other diseases like polymyalgia and other things. And we don't understand, but interestingly, they're around the age limit 60 seems to be important. So I think there's a couple of rationales for why this might be happening in this group, but it would have been impossible for me to think of any rationale had it been the reverse. Ali, over to you.
I fully agree with Dr. Conaghan. I think it would have been really challenging for us to begin to explain the results had they been the other way around. In some of the early conversations we had with Enlivex, I remember several months ago, maybe even a year ago, we were talking about the risk factors. As Philip pointed out, aging is still the number one risk factor for osteoarthritis. And at the tissue and cell level, at the molecular level, we have the process of senescence. And we've had a number of senolytic and xenomorphic osteoarthritis drug come and go without having much of an impact. So because they are so focused and targeted to that concept of senescence, perhaps they are missing some other important targets. So thinking about the concept of immunosenescence, as Philip eloquently put it, and immunomodulation, here you have a brand new platform, which is an apoptotic cell population that is able to communicate, come and eat me, and in the process get exhausted messages to the macrophages. And I think we are moving towards, and I used the term disruptive earlier. This is very disruptive because none of the other cell therapies are actually using this approach. And we know from some of the other cell therapy studies that are ongoing even now that many of the cells that you inject into the joint space will end up dying anyway. So there's probably an element of apoptosis in some of those other therapeutic platforms, but the special thing about Enlivex is that it's actually engineered to be immunomodulatory and to give inflammatory cells the I'm an apoptotic cell signal and come and sort me out. So that's what's very different about it. And I think, again, I want to use several times this term disruptive, and also from the cost perspective, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more because the paradigm for me has shifted, right? The goal was always to use mesenchymal cells and trophically exert factors that would keep cells alive, right? And kind of lower the inflammatory response. And so this is kind of the opposite of what's happening, but in a very confined and controlled area, the knee, which is different, also very different than a systemic approach. Um, and Dr. Conaghan, but Dr. Mobasheri, you can address this too. You mentioned something that really made me think. The results of this trial, they help the company design the pivotal trial, right? So by having this glaring effect seen in the pre-specified subgroup, does that suggest to you that the next trial should really just focus on people who are 60 or 65 and have, I don't know, radiologically determined osteoarthritis of the knee?
Yeah, I absolutely, firstly, is the short answer to it. I'm thinking about trial design questions. Yes, you want to optimize a successful phase 2, good phase 2B or something. And to do that, given the results of the subgroup analysis, you'd want to go in patients over 60 to do your trial. So I think that would be the wise target group. I think that's still feasible. The average age in clinical trials across multiple trials ends up being somewhere between 61 and 63. And we know roughly what happens in terms of the penalty if you try to take out the younger age group in terms of recruitment. But those things can be done mathematically to get people in. So yes, that's the group I would put in the trial. In terms of imaging inclusion, I'd probably just use standard inclusion at this stage, KL23, since that's going to be the market, and that's going to be what you're going to use in your subsequent trials in your phase 3. So that's where I'd go. I don't think we need to do anything too much because the results here were good in the phase in that age group, irrespective of X-ray. There are some other data. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about data that's not publicly available, but there are some other data that would make me think don't do anything different to what you've done so far.
So,
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure when you say don't do anything different than what you've done so far, I expect to see Dr. Pomerantz shaking his head because one of the
Right.
things as an analyst that has always made me crazy is when we see companies with one set of trial data phase two and then they change parameters and go into what they call a phase three. I'm like, no, actually, you need to revalidate those parameters. Dr. Mobasheri, I have I think, a decent question for you. Since we have 6 month data coming up, based on the mechanism of action and the data that you saw this time, would you expect the data to get better, stay the same, or maybe get slightly worse?
So one of the things we didn't talk about is the sort of regulatory expectations, typically what the FDA would look for in a clinical trial in terms of pain and function. I think we are very, very close to meeting their expectations. And again, it goes back to the classical trials that have been conducted. Typically, Philip will correct me if I'm wrong, is 12 and 24-week time points. Those seem to be essential time points. And we also need to be mindful of this new mantra that the FDA have, feel, function, and survive. So we need to think about reduction of pain, as Philip said, in a clinically meaningful way, improvement of joint function. Perhaps in the coming trial, we could also look at some additional, more agnostic measures of physical activity and steps. And Philip and I have had many fruitful discussions about this area. And then, of course, in the long term, you'd want to be able to show that a therapy such as this will have an impact on reducing the incidence of total knee arthroplasties. But I think in terms of what should be done, I think that the design that's being planned and the timelines are appropriate to be able to replicate these data, get more insight into safety and efficacy, go into subsequent trial phases.
Good, thank you. Well, we are all going to be looking forward to not just the next data tranche, but then the company talking a little bit about what they anticipate as kind of the next clinical step. Dr. Pomerantz, you've decided to associate your name with this company. You've been involved in acquiring companies. You've worked obviously at Merck and at Big Pharma. Uh, as we discussed earlier, I was always raised with having worked at Big Pharma myself, that it was always pills in a bottle, right? That kind of paradigm shifted a little bit as biologics, monoclonal antibodies, large molecules began to enter the fray. But still, pharma has been resistant to go in that direction. So forgive me if I put you in a big pharma box. What is it about what Enlivex is doing that makes you believe this is a viable model and that maybe big pharma should be taking a look at it? Of course, this is allogeneic, which kind of changes the cost of goods. Dr. Mobasheri, you kind of started to talk a little bit about pricing. I'll just say that I am a runner. I've been very aggressively running the last year. And after struggling with knee arthritis, I did get a Synvisc injection. It took 5 minutes. My orthopedic surgeon, I was in and out. That was about 3 weeks ago. My knees feel pretty good right now. I think the real effect, I'm told I'll see in 2 or 3 months. Maybe it lasts for 6 months. But I'll tell you what stunned me. And I had good insurance. I didn't have to pay a lot of money. But the charge to the insurance company was about $6,000. So there is a lot of pricing flexibility here, right? Because I would not have thought it would have been that expensive. So, when I think about cell therapy, I think about very expensive pricing. But maybe that's not the case here. So tell me a little bit about what you see when you look at what Enlivex is doing and why you decided to be associated with this company.
These are great questions, and your lived experience is a lovely story. And I've been in Munich for the last couple of days speaking at a symposium of 160 orthopedic specialists and some physical therapists and rheumatologists who basically do what you received, the intra-articular injection of hyaluronic acid.
Sure.
Now, I don't need to give you a long lecture about what the different societies think about the efficacy of HA and what the different guidelines that have been recently published say. Clearly, the society Philip and I are particularly affiliated with. ORC has left things a little bit open-ended. ORC does recommend intra-articular injections, but not as first-line treatment. And the remarkable thing about intra-articular injections with HA compared to ibuprofen and some of the other NSAIDs that Philip pointed out the side effects, the very significant long-term gastrointestinal, cardiovascular, and also renal side effects of these drugs.
Exactly.
You don't have that with HA. It may not be particularly effective, but boy, oh boy, a HA injection in the hands of an empathic doctor who cares about his patient can be quite a powerful real-world treatment.
I
Now,
promise when we when we repeat this call on the 6-month data, I will give you an update. So
thank you.
Dr. Pomerantz, we were talking a little bit about why you decided to be associated with this company. What is it about the therapy itself? Where do you view it in that spectrum of a personalized, super expensive cell therapy versus a pills in the bottle approach? And what would it take for and I'm not talking about investors, I'm talking about the MBA, BD level guy at pharma to say, we should grab this company because this is a big market, right? Where do they see proof of concept? And when do they want to get involved in an acquisition?
Yeah, so appreciate the question, appreciate listening to the scientists who study this on a day-to-day basis. And as you pointed out, I've had some experience in both biotech and in large pharma, being head of BD at Merck, as well as head of infectious disease at Merck, all at the same time, I might add. And why I got involved here was I would just change one of your statements. Pharma like to get involved in pills in the bottle, not only because it was easy, but because it's most likely to work. Small molecules, your father and mother's small molecules are what worked usually. So and I would just say that if you give large pharma an approach that works and is tractable and is payable, they will use it. It's just that if you're going to bet on pretest probability, you always bet on pills in the bottle until recently. But I think that changes with success. And why I got involved with Enlivex is I look, as I think I always did, but even more so now, at non-pills in the bottle, at things that are new modalities that can truly change the world. And do I think this can do that? Yes, I do. Because since I was a medical student, nothing worked for osteoarthritis. And yet everybody has it. Whether it's primary or secondary, whether it's young or old, no one gets out of this world without one joint going bad. And yet it was always a somewhat medically boring area because there was nothing to do for it besides NSAIDs, Tylenol, although in the United States we can't use Tylenol now, I've been told, as well as steroid injections with all the pluses and minuses there. But you haven't really gotten at the underlying problem of the disease. And when I heard that macrophages were part of this, I think they are the most unstudied of the immune cells, even though they have such importance, whether it's in the brain, the periphery, or such. So when I saw this, I said, this is finally making OA interesting. And what I mean by interesting is getting something that can change patients' lives and make a fair value for the shareholders. As was said, if you keep your eye on the data, the money will follow. The data here is compelling, that for the first time I've seen something in OA that, and I might add primary OA, maybe in the elderly, but that's a huge population and a growing one in both the developing and the developed world. And so when you see this, it makes you think that it's now becoming a real disease. What I mean by that is you're tackling the molecular mechanism at its core as opposed to sprinkling pain relievers. Not that they're not necessary, but wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to do that, as was said? Well, this is not, again, something that is one of those CAR T issues. This is very simple. It's really quite cost-effective manufacturing process, easy to use drug, and low COGS. I've been in a lot of payer pricing discussions in my time, and some went well, some went less well. If you put something in front of them for a disease like this, and it's about, we're looking at now maybe $450 a treatment, you have just tremendous pricing leverage there. And I would love to have that discussion. Some discussions are harder with payers. That's a great discussion to have if you have this sort of data and if you have that sort of COGS. I hope this gives you a reason why I was enthusiastic. I did vote with my feet, meaning I joined, and I was very happy with it. We have a great team. We have a great executive chair and CEO, and the data to me was compelling. It's now, as was pointed out, design the next right trial, do it so that people see the worth of it in a clear way. And I do think it's probably primary osteoarthritis in people above 60, but we'll talk this through and get the right trial. And then if you have data like that in this disease, whether it's pills in the bottle or dead cells in a tube, pharma will come. And having bought companies like this, you just have to show them great data. I've seen lots of small companies that everyone wrote off until the data looked spectacular, and then everything worked well for patients and for the shareholders.
You mentioned the quality of management, and I've been doing this for quite a while, been an analyst for many years, and I've seen lots of different board members. You don't strike me as a guy that's just going to lend your name and not be involved, and that you are involved and you're going to make sure that management is making the best decisions they can based on the available data. And what I'm really saying is that you're not afraid to have a spirited discussion to make sure that the clinical science is up to speed.
No, I don't have to do anything anymore in my life. I do this because I believe in it and I will contribute to it. I have been lucky enough, just by having great teams, to have been able to lead the development of 14 approved drugs in the US and around the globe. I would like this to be 15.
Wonderful.
And, if we can do something for osteoarthritis, that will be a big part of my career.
Thank you. Dr. Mobasheri, would you give us your kind of parting thoughts on what you see ahead?
I fully agree with Dr. Pomerantz. It's a really important area that we need to find safe and effective and cost-effective treatments. And going back to your experience, having paid $6,000 for your HA, I think we need to make some waves there. We need to ensure that we break this sequence of people receiving dozens and dozens of those, because again, they get some benefits from it, but that does not modify the disease. So we need to move towards developing intra-articular injections that are targeted, effective, and cost-effective in the long term, so that the companies who are making it, like some of the ones that started 20 years ago, are not trying to recoup the entire production costs of what they've been spending in for the last 20 years. That's crucially important. Thank you.
Perfect. And Dr. Conaghan.
I think I'd just repeat what Ali's just said. We are in desperate need. There's been nothing for years. Injectables are acceptable. And by the way, the whole rheumatoid arthritis field pivoted from the small pills to injectables for 20 years. They're going back though, Roger. So that's all right. Injectables are very acceptable, so long as you get some sort of benefit over, we've mentioned the 3-month sort of period, which is critical to the regulator. I think also important for clinical practice. 6 months is better. Any sort of prolonged benefit is better. We're yet to see that data to understand that for the Enlivex product, but you at least want 3 months benefit. And now we've got a therapy that has a plausible mechanism of action and an identified subset that it will work in. I think that's really important, because having looked at a whole lot of things that didn't make it to market, one of the fundamental problems was often the mechanism of action, that we couldn't understand how these things might work. So I think the plausible mechanism of action, identified target group of patients to treat, are very good predictors on top of the clinical data we've got.
Sounds great. What I'd very much like to do is in a couple of months, when we have the 6-month data, kind of regroup and discuss what that data looks like and what the implications are with regulators for the next step and for clinical trial design. This is part of my focus as an analyst, is rather than have a company do a canned presentation, to have kind of the people in the trenches that are familiar with the therapy, that are involved with the lifeblood of the company, talk about, freestyle a little bit on why they're involved with the company and what they think about it. And so, I think this gives investors a much better understanding of why they should support the company with their capital. We are an open architecture model. Please don't hesitate to go to our website, Boral Capital. You can pull down all of the research from the initiation of coverage to the reports. I'm a very prolific writer, so we put out a lot of information on all the companies we cover, but Enlivex is clearly one of the gems. I'm very passionate about it because I've been following the cell therapy space for years. And I think, like all of you, I want to see a success get put up on the board here, right? Because I think it opens the gate for more. And I think we will see others following. Thank you very much for joining us today. To all of my experts, really appreciate it. And I know Enlivex is watching, and we really appreciate their support to help make this happen too. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Great job. Thank you.